My name is Gerald Thomas Whitfield. I am 63 years old. My hands are rough from 40 years of work. My back hurts every morning when I wake up. My hair went white before I turned 50. And on the morning of October the 14th, I sat in a courtroom wearing the only suit I still owned. The same suit I wore to my son's college graduation 12 years ago, and I listened to my wife of 31 years look a judge in the eye and say words that I will never forget for the rest of my life. "He is useless," she said. Her voice was steady, no trembling, no hesitation. "He has always been useless. He contributed nothing to this marriage, nothing to this family. He is a burden, Your Honor. He always has been." The courtroom went quiet. I looked down at my hands. I did not say a single word. People say silence is weakness. People say a man who doesn't defend himself has nothing to defend. But sometimes, and I want you to understand this, sometimes silence is the loudest thing a man can say. Sometimes silence is the last door left standing between a man and the complete collapse of everything he believed in. I kept my eyes on my hands, and I waited. I had been waiting for this moment for a long time, longer than anyone in that room knew. And what happened next, what the judge said, what the attorney did, what was revealed in that courtroom on a cold Tuesday morning in October, changed everything. Stay with me, because this story is not what you think it is. I need to take you back, not just a few months, not even a few years. I need to take you back to 1987, to a small town in rural Ohio called Millfield. I was born the youngest of 4 children to a man named Harold Whitfield and a woman named Ruth. My father worked at a paper mill. My mother cleaned houses for families richer than ours. We were not poor in the way that breaks you, but we were poor in the way that teaches you the kind of poor where you learn that nothing comes free, that dignity is something you carry inside yourself because no one is going to hand it to you from outside. My father was a quiet man. People called him simple. People said Harold Whitfield never amounted to much. He drove an old pickup truck. He wore the same jacket for 15 winters. He didn't talk much at parties. He didn't drink. He didn't shout. He just worked. Every single day he just worked. I watched my father my entire childhood. And I made a decision very early in my life. I decided that I wanted to be exactly like him. Not because the world told me he was great. The world never said that. But because I saw how he moved through life with a kind of quiet dignity that no amount of money or noise could buy. I became a quiet man too. I met Patricia, my wife, at a church social in 1991. She was 24. I was 27. She had brown hair that fell past her shoulders, and she laughed at everything. And in 1991, a woman who laughed at everything seemed like the most beautiful thing in the world to a quiet man like me. We married in 1993, and for the first few years it was good. I am not going to pretend otherwise, because this story deserves honesty. We were happy, not in a fireworks kind of way, but in a steady, warm kind of way, like a wood stove on a cold night. Not flashy, but real. We had 2 children, our son Michael, born in 1995, and our daughter Lily, born in 1998. I worked as a maintenance supervisor at a manufacturing facility outside of Columbus. It was not glamorous work. I wore a uniform with my name on it. I crawled under machines in the dark. I came home smelling like oil and metal, and sometimes I was too tired to say much at dinner. But I never missed a single day. In 30 years, I never missed one single day of work. We raised our children in a house that was modest but clean. We took one vacation a year, usually to a lake in Michigan. I coached Michael's little league team for 4 years. I drove Lily to ballet every Thursday evening without fail. I fixed every broken thing in that house with my own hands. The roof, the furnace, the kitchen floor, every single thing. Patricia worked part-time at a school library until the children were teenagers. Then she stopped working entirely. I never asked her to stop, but I also never asked her to explain. Because that is the kind of man I was. I kept moving, I kept working. I kept being the wood stove on a cold night. And I assumed, because I was a fool, that the people warming themselves by that fire understood what it took to keep it burning. Michael grew up handsome and ambitious. He went to Ohio State on a partial scholarship, and I paid the rest every semester, quietly, without making it into a grand gesture. He studied business. He graduated. He met a woman named Vanessa at a networking event in Columbus when he was 26 years old. Vanessa was beautiful, polished, and sharp. She wore blazers and heels, and she could talk to anyone about anything. The first time I met her, she looked at our house, our modest, clean, perfectly maintained house, and I saw something move across her face. It was brief. She covered it quickly, but I saw it. It was the look of a woman who had already decided she had married above her circumstances, which was interesting, because Michael had grown up in that house. But I said nothing, because I was a quiet man. They married in 2021. It was a nice wedding. I paid for most of it without being asked, without announcing it, without putting my name on anything. I just transferred the money to Michael's account and told him to make sure Patricia had a good day. He said, "Sure, Dad." And that was that. Within the first year of their marriage, the changes started. Michael stopped calling as often. When he did call, it was usually to talk to Patricia, his mother, not to me. When they visited, Vanessa would make comments, small ones, subtle ones, the kind of comments that carry twice their weight in meaning. "Oh, this neighborhood," she said once, standing in our living room, looking out the window at the street. "It must be very comfortable, very old-fashioned." "It is," I said. "I like it." She smiled. "Of course you do." Michael laughed. Patricia laughed. I went to the kitchen to get everyone drinks. Then there was Christmas of 2022. Lily came home from Portland, where she'd moved with her boyfriend. Michael and Vanessa came from their new apartment in Dublin, a nice suburb outside Columbus. Patricia had cooked all day. I had spent a week fixing up the house, painting the front porch, making sure everything was in order. At dinner, Vanessa looked around the table and said, "Michael tells me you worked in maintenance, Gerald. That must have been very steady work." "It was," I said. "Do you miss it, now that you're retired?" "I keep busy," I said. She nodded, the way people nod when they're not really listening. "Michael says you were always more of a behind-the-scenes kind of person." I looked at my son. He was looking at his plate. "I suppose I was," I said, and Patricia, my wife of almost 30 years, said nothing, just passed the bread rolls and started talking to Vanessa about her apartment's renovation. That was the night something shifted in me, not broke, shifted, like a foundation that develops a crack you can see, but haven't yet decided what to do about. 2023 was the year my marriage ended. Not officially, that came later. But the truth of it ended in 2023. Patricia had been spending more and more time with Michael and Vanessa. Weekend trips to Dublin, shopping trips with Vanessa, lunches, phone calls every day. She came back from these visits different, a little more impatient with our house, a little more impatient with me, a little more in love with the idea of a life she hadn't lived. "Vanessa thinks we should downsize," she told me one evening in March. "We live in a 3-bedroom house," I said. "She says it's inefficient, carrying costs on a house this size for 2 people. I've owned this house since 1996. I said, "There's no mortgage, there are no carrying costs." "Well, maybe you could sell it and give Michael the money for his investment." I put down my fork. "Patricia," I said quietly, "whose idea was this conversation?" She went silent. Then she said, "That's not fair." I'm just asking, I said. She didn't answer. She picked up her phone and texted someone. I assumed I knew who. The requests got stranger after that. Patricia asked me to skip Michael and Vanessa's anniversary dinner because Vanessa had mentioned that my energy was heavy. I am not a man who uses words like energy as insults, so I had to have Lily explain to me on the phone what that meant. She basically thinks you're a downer, Dad, Lily said. I'm sorry. Did you hear this from Michael? I heard it from Patricia. I sat with that for a long time. Then, in July of 2023, Patricia told me she wanted a divorce. She said it the way you might tell someone the milk has gone off. Matter-of-factly, standing at the kitchen counter, not even turning around to face me. I want a divorce, Gerald. I sat at the kitchen table. The same kitchen table we'd had since 1998. The one with the scratch on the left side from the time Michael pushed a toy truck off the edge, and it nicked the wood on the way down. Okay, I said, okay. She turned around then. She looked almost annoyed, like she'd prepared for a fight and I'd refused to show up for it. What would you like me to say, Patricia? She stopped. Don't you want to know why? I think I know why, I said. But tell me if you want to. She told me it was about fulfillment, about feeling unseen, about wanting more from life than what we had built together. She used phrases that didn't sound like her. They sounded like conversations she'd had with someone else, practiced and smoothed into something she could say without her voice breaking. I listened to all of it. Then I said, all right, Patricia, I'll call a lawyer. She looked at me like I was a stranger. Maybe I was. Maybe she'd been looking at a stranger for years and only just realized it. The divorce process brought out things I had never seen in my wife. Or maybe, and this is harder to admit, things I had always seen, just never wanted to name. Her attorney was a man named Richard Hastings. Expensive suit. Aggressive manner. The kind of lawyer who bills by the 10th of an hour and speaks in a voice calibrated to make opposing parties feel small. Michael and Vanessa stood firmly behind Patricia. Michael came to every meeting with his mother. He sat beside her with his arms crossed, and he looked at me. His father, like I, was a problem to be managed. One evening, during a mediation session that was going poorly, Michael said to me quietly, Dad, just sign what she's asking for. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. I looked at my son who I had worked every day for 30 years to provide for. My son whose college tuition I had paid, whose wedding I had funded, whose first car I had co-signed, whose childhood I had shown up for every single day without missing once. Michael, I said very quietly, I love you, but you don't actually know what you're asking me to sign. It's just money, Dad. It's not just money, I said. But I'll think about it. He nodded, apparently satisfied. Vanessa smiled at him, and they left together. Patricia didn't look at me on their way out. Lily called me from Portland that night. Dad, are you okay? I'm managing, I said. Michael texted me. He says you're being difficult. Lily, I said, do you think I'm useless? There was a pause on the phone. A long one. Long enough that I counted the seconds in my head. Of course not, Dad. That's a strange question. Your mother's attorney used that word in his filing. I was just wondering if it was a view held by the family. Another pause. Dad, what did the filing say exactly? You don't need to worry about it. I said, how's Portland? She started crying before she could answer. I spent a long time that night sitting in the kitchen in the dark. Not out of despair, just thinking. There is a kind of thinking that only happens in the dark and the quiet, and I had a great deal to think about. Because there was something that Patricia's attorney didn't know. Something that Michael didn't know. Something that Vanessa, for all her sharpness, had completely failed to find. And the courtroom was 3 weeks away. I want to tell you about something that happened 6 years ago, because it matters. It is the thing that no one in that courtroom knew about except me and two other people in the world. In 2018, I was still working as a maintenance supervisor, but I had also been doing something else for almost 15 years. Quietly, privately, without telling anyone, not Patricia, not Michael, not Lily, not a single soul in my family. You see, in 2003, a man I worked with named Dennis Farrow pulled me aside one afternoon and told me about a property deal, an industrial parcel of land outside of Columbus that a developer was trying to unload cheap because of a zoning dispute. Dennis said the zoning issue would be resolved within 5 years, and the land would be worth 10 times what it was listed for. I had $14,000 saved. It was money I had put aside over 3 years, skimming a little from each paycheck without Patricia noticing, because I had always believed in having something that was mine alone, not out of secrecy, but out of the kind of instinct a man raised poor develops about self-preservation. I put all $14,000 into that land. Dennis was right. By 2009, it was worth $140,000. I sold half, reinvested the rest, and bought into 2 more parcels that Dennis pointed me toward. By 2015, I had an investment portfolio worth just over $800,000. By 2018, the year I quietly retired from my maintenance job a little earlier than anyone expected, Patricia thought I had been laid off, and I let her believe that the portfolio was worth just under $2 million. I had a financial advisor named Carol Simmons, who managed everything from a small office in Westerville. I met with her quarterly. I drove to those meetings alone. Patricia never asked where I went on those Tuesday afternoons. In 30 years of marriage, there are a great many things that happen in the white space between conversations. I had never lied to Patricia about this money. I had simply never mentioned it, and she had never asked. And the law, as my attorney, a quiet woman named Helen Moss, had patiently explained to me, treated separately, acquired and separately, maintained premarital and individual assets with considerable specificity. Helen had filed the appropriate disclosures, but she had filed them in the technical language of financial documents, the kind of language that a man like Richard Hastings, who was used to straightforward middle-class divorce cases involving shared bank accounts and family homes, had apparently not read carefully enough. Or perhaps he had read them and simply hadn't believed what he was reading. Either way, I had watched him build his entire case around the premise that I was a retired maintenance worker with a modest pension and a pay-off house. He had called me useless in his filings. He had no idea who I was. And the morning of October the 14th, I put on my old suit, and I drove to the courthouse, and I sat down at that table, and I waited. The hearing was for asset division. It was supposed to be straightforward. Richard Hastings was confident. You could see it in the way he walked, in the way he set his files down on the table, in the way he glanced at me, at my old suit, at my quiet face, and smiled just slightly to himself. Patricia sat beside him in a new coat. Vanessa had helped her pick it, I suspected. She looked good. She didn't look at me. Michael was in the gallery, Vanessa beside him. A few of Patricia's friends. Lily had flown in from Portland. She sat on my side of the gallery. She was the only one who did. I sat beside Helen. Helen was 51, wore her hair short, and had the kind of calm that comes from 25 years of family law. She had a single folder in front of her, thin, neatly labeled. Richard Hastings opened with what he clearly considered a masterpiece. He spoke for 15 minutes about the nature of the marriage, Patricia's sacrifices, my professional inadequacies, my failure to provide an ambitious or aspirational environment for the family, my emotional unavailability, and my general uselessness as a partner and a husband. He used that word 3 times. Useless Patricia testified. She spoke about feeling unseen, about years of emotional disconnection. She spoke about my silence as a kind of cruelty. She said, and I remember every word, "Your Honor, I spent 31 years married to a man who never once made me feel like I mattered. He was present in the house, but absent from the marriage. He was useless to me emotionally and frankly professionally. He never achieved anything of note. He just existed. The room was quiet. I looked at my hands, and then Helen Moss opened her folder. She stood up and said, in the same quiet, measured voice she used for everything, "Your Honor, before the court moves to asset assessment, I'd like to enter into evidence the full financial disclosure prepared on behalf of my client, Gerald Thomas Whitfield." Richard Hastings looked up. Something in Helen's tone made him look up. Helen set 3 documents on the clerk's desk. The clerk passed one to the judge, a woman in her mid-50s named Judge Ann Carroll, who had short silver hair and reading glasses on a chain around her neck. Judge Carroll put on her glasses and looked at the document. She was quiet for a moment. Then she looked at Richard Hastings. Then she looked at me. Then she looked back at Richard Hastings, and she said, "Words I will carry for the rest of my life. Mr. Hastings, before we continue, I'd like to ask you a question." Hastings straightened. "Of course, Your Honor. Did you conduct a full independent financial investigation of your opposing party prior to these proceedings?" Hastings frowned. "Standard discovery was conducted, Your Honor. Mr. Whitfield's assets were declared as—" "Did you read the full declaration, Mr. Hastings?" A pause. "I reviewed the summary." Judge Carroll took off her glasses and looked at him over the frames. "Mr. Hastings," she said, "you really don't know who he is." The courtroom went very, very still. Richard Hastings looked at the document the clerk now placed in front of him. He looked at it for a long moment. I watched the color change in his face. It was a slow change, like watching a sky go from blue to gray before a storm. He looked at Patricia. Patricia looked at him. "What is this?" she said very quietly. Helen said calmly, "It is a full accounting of my client's separate property assets, held independently for 20 years, properly maintained and properly disclosed in the original discovery filing, which your counsel appears to have treated as a standard pension statement, rather than reading it in full." Hastings said nothing. Helen continued, "My client, Gerald Whitfield, holds independent assets currently valued at just under $2.4 million, in addition to a fully owned property. These assets were accumulated through separate investment activity beginning in 2003, prior to significant appreciation, and have been maintained exclusively under my client's name throughout the marriage. Under Ohio law, separate property is not subject to equitable distribution. The house, which was jointly owned, my client is prepared to discuss. Everything else belongs to him." The room erupted. Not loudly. The room didn't erupt into shouting. It erupted into that specific silence that is louder than any noise. The silence of everyone in a room suddenly realizing they have been operating on completely wrong information. Patricia made a sound. I can't describe it exactly. It was small and sharp, like something snapping. Michael stood up in the gallery. "What?" His voice cracked. "What did Dad? What is she talking about?" I turned and looked at my son. My son, who had told me to just sign what she was asking for. My son, who had called me difficult. My son, who had sat beside his mother and his wife, and looked at me like I was a problem to be managed. I looked at him for a long moment, and then I turned back around and looked at my hands. Judge Carroll called a recess. In the hallway, things became what I can only describe as complicated. Patricia grabbed my arm outside the courtroom doors. This was the first time she had voluntarily touched me in over a year. "Gerald," her voice was shaking. "Gerald, how long have you—" "20 years, Patricia." "Why didn't you tell me? I looked at her. I looked at her for a long time. You never asked about my Tuesday afternoons. I said. That's not. She stopped. That's not fair. You told a judge I was useless. She opened her mouth, then she closed it. Michael came through the door behind her. Vanessa was behind him, and for the first time since I had known her, Vanessa's composure was completely gone. She looked frightened, almost, like someone who has been confidently walking in one direction and just realized the ground ends 20 feet ahead of them. "Dad," Michael said. He was using a different voice now, the voice from when he was a boy, the voice from when he had broken something and needed to tell me. "Dad, I didn't know. I didn't know about any of this." "I know you didn't," I said. "You should have told us." "Should I have?" I said. And I said it gently. I want to be clear, I said it gently, not bitterly. Should I have made an announcement? Should I have led with it at every dinner? Should I have worn it as a name tag so Vanessa would know to speak to me differently? Michael flinched. Vanessa looked at the floor. "I am the same man I have always been," I said. "I was the same man this morning as I am right now. The only thing that changed between this morning and right now is a number. And if a number changes how you see me, if what I have, rather than who I am, is what determines whether I deserve your respect, then I want you to think very carefully about what that says." I looked at Vanessa when I said that last part. Not unkindly, but directly. Lily appeared from inside the courtroom. She had been crying. She crossed the hallway and put her arms around me without saying a word. I stood in that hallway with my daughter's arms around me, and I looked at my son and my wife and my daughter-in-law, and I felt not victory. This was never about victory. I felt the specific sadness of a man who has been proven right about something he desperately wished he'd been wrong about. Helen Moss was thorough, and she was good at her job. The divorce was finalized 2 months later. Patricia received the house. I had always intended that she would. I had built and maintained that house for 30 years, and it felt right that she should have it. She also received a fair settlement from the joint accounts we had built together. Everything that was jointly ours, she received her share of fairly. She did not receive the investment portfolio. Under Ohio law, it was mine. Helen had made sure of that from the beginning. I moved into a small apartment in Westerville, near Carol Simmons' office. It was clean and bright, and it had large windows, and it was the first space in my adult life that was entirely, unambiguously mine. Michael called me 3 weeks after the finalization. It was a Sunday morning. I was drinking coffee and reading. "Dad, can we talk?" "We can always talk," I said. He came over that afternoon, alone without Vanessa, which I noted. He sat on the couch in my new apartment, and he looked at his hands for a long time before he said anything. He had always done that when he was young, before difficult conversations. He'd gotten it from me, I suppose. "I'm sorry," he said. "I need to say that first. I'm sorry for what I said, for calling you difficult, for siding with, for not asking more questions, for assuming I knew the whole picture." "Thank you for saying that," I said. "I didn't know, Dad, about the money, about any of it. I know. But here's the thing," he said, and his voice cracked a little. "I should have defended you anyway, regardless of what you had or didn't have. I should never have let anyone call you useless, especially not," he stopped, "especially not in a courtroom." I looked at my son. He was 29 years old. He looked, in that moment, about 12. "Come here," I said. He crossed the room, and I put my hand on the back of his neck the way I had when he was small, and he put his head down on my shoulder, and he cried. Properly cried, the kind a grown man does when he has been holding it for too long. I let him. "You are my son," I said. "That doesn't change, not because of a number, not because of anything. I don't deserve that," he said. "You're my son," I said again. "That's not about deserving." 6 months after the divorce, I received a handwritten letter in the mail. My name on the envelope in Patricia's handwriting, which I would know anywhere after 31 years. Inside was 2 pages, front and back, in the small, careful script she used when she was trying to write something important. I am not going to share everything in that letter. Some things belong to the people they were written for, and this is mine. But I will share the last paragraph, because it is the part that mattered most. She wrote, I spent 31 years standing next to you without ever looking at you. I thought I knew what you were because I knew what you did. I didn't know what you were because I never asked. I called you useless in front of a judge, and I meant it, and I have not slept a full night since. Not because of the money, Gerald. I need you to know it is not because of the money. Because of what I said about a man who spent his entire life quietly making sure everyone around him was okay. I don't know when I stopped seeing you, but I stopped, and I am sorry. I read that letter 3 times. Then I put it in a drawer. Then I made myself dinner, and I sat at my small table with the large window, and I watched the evening come in over Westerville, Ohio, and I thought about my father, Harold Whitfield, who drove an old pickup truck and wore the same jacket for 15 winters, and I thought he would have understood this completely. The quiet men always do. Let me tell you the truth about what this story is really about. It is not about money. I want to be very clear about that. I know that the money is the dramatic center of this story, the revelation in the courtroom, the shock on their faces, the number that changed a room. I understand that is the part that catches your breath, but the money was never the point. The point is this: for 31 years, I showed up. Every single day I showed up. I drove my daughter to ballet. I coached my son's little league team. I paid the tuition, funded the wedding, fixed the roof, kept the heat on, and never, not once, asked to be celebrated for it. Because that is not why I did it. I did it because it was right, because they were my family, because love, the real kind, is not something you do for a reward. The point is that a person can be standing right next to you, quietly holding up the sky, and if they do it quietly enough, you will eventually forget the sky was ever in danger of falling. The point is that silence can be mistaken for absence, and humility can be mistaken for weakness, and a man who doesn't broadcast his worth is not a man without worth. He is a man who never believed his worth needed broadcasting. I was not useless. I was just quiet. And in a world that mistakes loudness for significance, quiet men are always at risk of being called useless by the very people they spent their lives serving. I do not say this bitterly. I am 63 years old, and I am sitting in my apartment in Westerville with large windows, and I have enough money to live well, and I have my daughter who calls me every Sunday, and my son who is slowly finding his way back to me, and a letter in a drawer from a woman who finally saw me too late to change what had happened. But still, she saw me. That has to be enough, and mostly it is. There is a man somewhere near you right now who wakes up before everyone else. He doesn't talk much. He doesn't complain much. He shows up to every single thing that matters, and he stands in the back, so the people he loves can stand in the front. He drives the old car, so his family can drive the new one. He eats the last piece of everything last. He never says, I sacrificed this for you, because to him it was never a sacrifice. It was just what you do. You might look at him and see plainness. You might look at him and see nothing remarkable. You might look at him and use a word, a small, devastating word like useless. Before you do, I want you to ask yourself one question. When did you last actually look at him? Not at his car, not at his job title, not at his social presence, or his conversational gifts, or the way he doesn't quite fit in with the people who talk the loudest. Look at him, look at what he does. Look at what has been quietly held together by hands you stopped noticing years ago. Because the day you look, really look, might be the day you're sitting in a courtroom wondering how you missed it. And if you are the quiet man, if you are Gerald in this story, I want you to hear this. Your silence is not nothing. Your work is not invisible. Your love is not worthless because it doesn't come with a performance attached. The wood stove doesn't need to make noise to keep the house warm. Keep burning. My name is Gerald Thomas Whitfield. I am 63 years old. My hands are rough. My back still hurts every morning. And I have never, not once, been useless. If this story moved you, if you saw someone you know in Gerald's silence, please subscribe, leave a comment below, and share this with someone who needs to hear it today. You never know whose story you might be telling.